Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in life when the world throws its weapons, doubt, fear, betrayal, and pain straight at your soul. But when God covers you, those weapons lose their power. They may form, they may fly, but they will not prosper, because divine covering is not just protection, it is purpose wrapped in grace. It is the quiet assurance that no matter who stands against you, heaven still stands for you. And when God stands for you, no force on earth can move you. When we say that God's covering turns battles into blessings, we are speaking of a truth that lives deep in the heart of every person who has ever walked through fire and found themselves still standing. There is something miraculous that happens when you trust God in the midst of struggle. The battle that was meant to break you becomes the very ground on which your strength is built. The pain that was sent to silence you becomes the melody of your testimony. Every tear that fell becomes a seed that grows into a harvest of wisdom and grace. When you are covered by God, you begin to see that what looked like destruction was actually divine direction. You realize that the same storm that came to drown you was also the wind that pushed you closer to your purpose. God's covering doesn't mean life will be without conflict. It means that conflict will not consume you. It means that every challenge carries a hidden message from heaven, whispering, "You were made for this." When the enemy throws his weapons, you may feel the pressure, but you will not fall apart. Because God has a way of transforming every attack into an awakening. He turns your opposition into opportunity. He takes what was meant for evil and folds it gently into the fabric of your destiny until it becomes part of the beauty of your story. When God covers you, the fire doesn't destroy, it refines. The storms don't bury, they reveal. The pain doesn't end you, it expands you. There are seasons in your life when you may not understand why you are being tested, why the people you trusted turned away, why doors that seemed promised to you suddenly closed. But later, when the dust settles, you will look back and see how every closed door was a redirection to something greater. The very battle that made you cry out to God became the blessing that drew you closer to His heart. That's what divine covering does. It changes the way you experience the battle. It lifts your perspective from survival to purpose. Sometimes God allows the battle to come, not to show you your weakness, but to show you His strength within you. When you are covered by His grace, the things that once intimidated you lose their power. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start saying, "What is this teaching me?" You begin to walk with quiet confidence, not because life is easy, but because you know you are not walking alone. God's covering wraps around you like invisible armor, protecting your mind from fear, your heart from bitterness, and your soul from despair. Under His covering, every battle begins to make sense. Every delay carries divine intention. Every disappointment becomes divine redirection. You start to see that the blessing isn't always in the victory, it's often in the process. The battle blesses you because it teaches endurance, it teaches faith, it teaches gratitude. It reminds you that God is not only present in your peace, but also present in your pain. And once you learn to recognize His presence in every season, you stop fighting the battle and start growing through it. Think of Joseph, thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, forgotten in a prison. Yet through it all, he was covered by God. What looked like betrayal became the bridge to his destiny. What seemed like abandonment became alignment. The battle he fought was not against people, but against the temptation to give up before the blessing came. And when the blessing did come, it was not small, it was kingdom-sized. The same brothers who once tried to destroy him had to witness the glory of what God built through him. That is what divine covering does. It redeems your pain until even your enemies have to acknowledge the power of your God. Sometimes the covering of God is not loud, it's quiet, like a whisper in the dark saying, "Hold on, I'm still here. You might not see it at first. You might think you're standing alone, fighting a battle too heavy to bear. But the truth is, you're surrounded. Surrounded by grace, surrounded by angels, surrounded by promises that cannot fail. You are being carried through what others thought would crush you. That's why you can walk through fire and not smell like smoke. That's why you can stand in storms and still have peace in your heart. Because the covering of God doesn't just protect your body, it preserves your spirit. Every battle under God's covering serves a purpose that is bigger than your pain. Maybe it's preparing you for something you can't yet see. Maybe it's training you to be a light for someone else who will one day walk through the same darkness. God never wastes a wound. Every scar you carry is a story of grace. Every trial you've faced is a testimony in progress. You may not see the blessing while you're in the middle of the battle, but trust that the blessing is already being formed in heaven's workshop, designed specifically for you. There are times when God's covering hides you, not to punish you, but to protect you. He may remove people from your life, close doors that seemed perfect, or delay opportunities that looked promising. But in time, you realize He was not rejecting you, He was redirecting you. Because if the wrong people had access to you too soon, they would have contaminated what God was building within you. The covering is sometimes a separation, sometimes a season of silence, sometimes a stretching of your faith. Yet, every time, it is filled with divine intention. When God covers you, even your mistakes turn into miracles. He takes your broken pieces and arranges them into a masterpiece of mercy. The battle humbles you so that the blessing won't destroy you. The struggle teaches you to depend on Him more deeply. You stop chasing validation from the world and start resting in the assurance of divine favor. That's the transformation. What once made you anxious now makes you anchored. You no longer fear the fight because you know who fights for you. The greatest blessings often emerge from the hardest battles. The people who have known deep pain often carry deep peace because they've seen God sustain them in ways words cannot explain. That's why when you are covered, you can walk through the valley of the shadow of death and still say, I will fear no evil. You can lose what you thought you needed and still find everything you were meant to have, because the covering ensures that nothing truly meant for you will ever pass you by. You begin to notice how God uses the battle to build your compassion. You start seeing others not as enemies, but as reflections of the same human struggle. The blessing is not only in what you gain, but in who you become. You become more patient, more understanding, more courageous. You start living not from fear, but from faith. You stop measuring your worth by what you have and start recognizing your worth by who holds you. God's covering transforms every battlefield into holy ground. The pain becomes a pulpit. The scars become symbols of survival. The tears become prayers that water the soil of your destiny. Every battle becomes a classroom where God teaches you the language of resilience. He teaches you to stand still when you want to run, to listen when you want to speak, to believe even when everything around you says doubt. When you're covered, even in the chaos, you find calm. Even in uncertainty, you find clarity. Even in loss, you find love that never leaves. The blessing is not that you avoid the fire, but that you come out purified, shining, and ready for the next assignment. God uses the battle to bless you with wisdom you couldn't have learned in comfort. He uses the opposition to sharpen your discernment, the heartbreak to deepen your empathy, and the silence to strengthen your faith. There is nothing wasted under God's covering. Every season serves a sacred purpose. Every wound teaches you something heaven sent. The same battle that once made you question your faith becomes the reason your faith is now unshakable. You begin to realize that your journey was never about the fight, it was about the transformation. Because when God covers you, He doesn't just protect you from harm, He prepares you for greatness. And so, every time you face a battle, remind yourself that you are covered. The same God who turned the cross into resurrection is turning your struggle into strength. The same God who made water stand still for Moses will make the storm settle for you. The same God who shut the mouths of lions for Daniel will silence every force that rises against your purpose. The battle is not the end, it's the beginning of your blessing. Faith is the armor that fear cannot pierce. It is the invisible shield that wraps around your soul when the world around you begins to shake. It is the quiet courage that rises inside you when every voice tells you to give up. Faith is not just belief, it is movement in the direction of what you cannot see. It is walking forward when logic tells you to turn back. It is trusting the hand of God even when you cannot trace His plan. Faith is what makes you stand tall in a storm and whisper, "I will not be moved," because you know who holds you. Fear may knock at the door of your mind, but when faith answers, fear has no room to stay. When life brings its uncertainties, fear tries to become your language. It whispers that you are not enough, that the future is too dark, that the mountain ahead is too high. But faith speaks louder. Faith says, "Even if I cannot see the top, I will keep climbing." It says, "Even if I fall, grace will lift me." It says, "Even when I walk through the valley, I am never alone." The power of faith is not that it removes fear completely, but that it makes fear powerless. It builds a spiritual armor around your thoughts, your emotions, your very being, so that fear may touch your circumstances but never enter your spirit. There are moments in life when fear feels overwhelming. When sickness comes, when relationships break, when dreams delay, fear stands like a shadow, trying to convince you that God has forgotten your name. But faith rises up like light, breaking through the darkness, reminding you that even in the silence, God is still speaking. Faith is not the absence of doubt. It is the decision to believe in the middle of it. It is the choice to hold on to hope when everything around you says, "Let go." It is the armor that keeps your heart steady when life tries to shake you loose from peace. Faith is built not in comfort, but in conflict. You do not grow faith when everything is easy. You grow it when you have no choice but to trust. When the way forward is unclear, faith becomes your compass. When the ground beneath you trembles, faith becomes your foundation. It is in those moments when you cannot depend on sight that your spiritual vision sharpens. Faith begins to teach you to see beyond what is visible, to recognize that God's hand is moving even when your eyes cannot trace His work. That's why faith protects you. It doesn't always change your surroundings immediately, but it changes the way you walk through them. When you wear faith as your armor, life's arrows cannot destroy you. They may sting, they may bruise, but they cannot pierce the core of who you are. Because at your core lies the truth that God is greater than anything that comes against you. The doctor's report may say one thing, but your faith says another. The world may declare defeat, but your faith whispers victory. The situation may look impossible, but your faith remembers that with God, all things are possible. Every time fear tries to take hold, faith reminds you that you are already covered, already chosen, already equipped for the battle before you. Faith has a way of shifting your perspective. It teaches you to see battles as blessings in disguise, to see delays as divine protection, to see endings as the beginning of something greater. Fear wants you to panic, but faith invites you to pause. Fear tells you to retreat, but faith says, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." When you walk by faith, you no longer depend on what you feel, you depend on what you know. You know that even when things don't make sense, God is still in control. You know that even when you cannot change the situation, you can change your posture in it. Faith does not remove fear by force, it starves it by focus. The more you focus on God's promises, the less space fear has to grow. The more you remind yourself of what He has already done, the more confident you become in what He will do next. That is why people of faith speak differently, think differently, and walk differently. They are not blind to the battle, they simply know the outcome has already been written by divine hands. Faith gives them peace in the middle of war, calm in the middle of chaos, and strength in the middle of sorrow. Fear feeds on what you imagine can go wrong. Faith feeds on what you know will go right. Fear magnifies the problem. Faith magnifies the promise. Fear sees giants. Faith sees God. The two cannot coexist in the same space for long. One will always silence the other. That is why the armor of faith is so powerful. It gives you the strength to stand when your emotions want to collapse. It gives you the courage to smile even when tears are close. It gives you the grace to keep showing up, to keep believing, to keep moving forward when every part of you wants to stop. Faith is not always loud. Sometimes it's just a whisper in your soul that says, keep going. Sometimes it's a small prayer in the dark, a trembling hand lifted in surrender, a silent yes to God's will, even when you don't understand it. That's still faith. It doesn't have to roar to be real. Even the smallest seed of faith, planted in the soil of trust, can grow into a tree that withstands every storm. The Bible says that faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains, not because of the size of your belief, but because of the power of the one you believe in. Every time you choose faith over fear, you are building your spiritual armor. Every time you refuse to let worry steal your peace, your armor becomes stronger. Every time you trust God in uncertainty, you reinforce your shield. You begin to walk differently. Your steps become lighter, your heart more stable, your mind more peaceful. You no longer need to control everything because you trust the one who controls it all. Fear thrives in control, but faith thrives in surrender. The moment you surrender to God's plan, fear begins to lose its grip. There are people who look at your calm in the middle of chaos and wonder how you do it. They see the same storms you see but can't understand your peace. What they don't realize is that it's not that you don't feel fear, it's that faith keeps it from consuming you. Faith whispers, "This too shall pass." Faith reminds you that what looks like an ending might just be a divine beginning. Faith allows you to walk through dark places without losing your light. It becomes your armor, reflecting every dart of doubt that tries to reach your heart. Fear tells you that you are unworthy, unloved, unable. Faith reminds you that you are chosen, cherished, capable. Fear says you will fall. Faith says God will catch you. Fear points to your weakness. Faith points to His strength. When you are dressed in the armor of faith, you no longer respond to life from a place of panic, you respond from a place of peace. The weapons of worry cannot touch a heart that is guarded by trust. In moments of uncertainty, when the future looks dim and the path ahead seems foggy, faith becomes the lamp that lights your steps. It doesn't always show you the entire road, but it gives you enough light for the next step, and that is enough. Because faith doesn't require knowing everything, it just requires knowing who goes before you. When you realize that, fear begins to lose its authority. You stop running from what scares you and start walking toward what strengthens you. Faith is a decision you make daily. Every morning you wake up and choose to believe again, even if yesterday was hard. You choose to trust again, even if last night you cried. You choose to hope again, even if you are still waiting for the breakthrough. That's the beauty of faith. It keeps you standing in the in-between, between the promise and the fulfillment, between the prayer and the answer. Fear may try to whisper that the waiting is wasted, but faith knows that waiting is working. Something is always being prepared behind the scenes. Sometimes faith feels like standing in the middle of a storm with your eyes closed, arms lifted, saying, "I still trust you." It is that act of surrender that becomes your strength. Fear tells you to fight for control, but faith tells you to let go and trust the process. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. Because the moment you release what you can't control, you make room for God to do what only He can do. Faith is the armor that turns fear's arrows into lessons. Every doubt becomes an invitation to trust deeper. Every challenge becomes a chance to grow stronger. Every trial becomes proof that God's grace is greater than your fear. You begin to live from a place of inner assurance, knowing that no matter what happens, you are covered. The same faith that carried you through the last storm will carry you through this one too. When fear tells you that you can't make it, faith reminds you that you already have. When fear shows you your failures, faith shows you your future. When fear tells you to quit, faith tells you to rise. The armor of faith doesn't stop the attacks, it stops them from defining you. It keeps your identity rooted in God's promise rather than your pain. It teaches you that peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of trust. And so, faith becomes not just your protection, but your power. It becomes the reason you can smile in struggle, stand in suffering, and sing in sorrow. Because faith knows that beyond the fight, there is fulfillment. Beyond the pain, there is purpose. Beyond the fear, there is freedom. It is the unshakable knowing that whatever comes, God has already made a way through it. Faith becomes your armor, and under that armor, no weapon of fear can ever reach your heart. ChatGPT said, "No weapon formed against you can prosper when your spirit stays anchored in prayer." Prayer is the lifeline between you and heaven, the sacred conversation that connects the human soul with divine strength. It is the invisible force that surrounds you when words fail and the world feels heavy. When your spirit is anchored in prayer, you are not moved by the chaos around you because you are held by something greater within you. The storms may rise, enemies may plot, obstacles may appear, but none of it can destroy the one who stays connected to God in constant communication. Prayer doesn't just change your situation, it changes your position within the situation. It shifts your focus from the weapon that is formed to the God who formed the world. When your heart is rooted in prayer, fear begins to lose its power. The things that once shook you no longer break you. The people who once wounded you no longer have access to your peace. Because prayer builds a wall of light around your spirit that no darkness can penetrate. It becomes your spiritual defense system, your invisible armor that blocks the fiery darts of negativity, hate, doubt, and despair. Every time you pray, you strengthen that shield. Every time you choose to go to God, instead of reacting to the world, you reinforce your covering. That's why the enemy fears a praying soul, because prayer invites heaven into the battlefield. Prayer is not just a ritual, it is relationship. It is the sacred rhythm of trust and surrender. It's where you lay down your fears and pick up God's peace. When your spirit is anchored in prayer, you stop reacting and start responding. You stop panicking and start praising. You stop focusing on the attack and start focusing on the one who fights for you. The weapons may still form, but they lose their power to prosper because prayer keeps you aligned with divine will. God does not promise the absence of warfare, but He promises victory through worship. He does not promise a life without trials, but He promises that through prayer, every trial will serve a purpose. When your heart prays, your spirit stays awake. You begin to see through spiritual eyes, understanding that some battles are not fought with flesh and blood, but with faith and prayer. You realize that every attack that comes against you is designed to disconnect you from your source of strength. That's why prayer is essential. It keeps your soul plugged into divine energy. When you pray, you invite God's presence into your pain. You remind yourself that you are not standing alone. You remind the enemy that your peace cannot be stolen, your destiny cannot be denied, and your faith cannot be shaken. Prayer changes the atmosphere around you. It silences confusion and replaces it with clarity. It replaces anxiety with assurance, weakness with courage, and chaos with calm. When you kneel before God, you rise above the world. You might still face the weapon, but it cannot touch you because you are wrapped in divine protection. The battle may roar, but your spirit remains still. You find yourself speaking peace into storms that once terrified you. You find yourself blessing those who once betrayed you. You find yourself standing firm when others fall apart, not because you are strong, but because prayer has made you unbreakable. There's something sacred about a soul that prays without ceasing. It walks through darkness with a quiet light, through trials with a quiet strength. It doesn't need to prove anything because prayer has already done the proving. Prayer anchors your identity in God, not in circumstances. When life tries to define you by your struggle, prayer reminds you of your strength. When people try to pull you down with words, prayer lifts you up with wisdom. When the enemy tries to plant fear, prayer plants faith. And when the weapon forms, prayer disarms it before it can even reach your heart. Prayer is where divine exchange happens. You bring your burdens, and God gives you peace. You bring your confusion, and He gives you clarity. You bring your brokenness, and He gives you beauty. Every prayer you whisper carries the weight of your faith. Even when words don't come, your tears become language in heaven, your sighs become sacred songs, your silence becomes strength. That is how powerful prayer is. It translates pain into power, weakness into worship, worry into wisdom. The reason no weapon can prosper against a praying spirit is because prayer keeps your spirit grounded. It roots you so deeply in God's presence that attacks lose their aim. The weapons may fly, but they can't find you because prayer has shifted your position. You are no longer operating in the natural realm. You are moving in the spiritual. The world sees what is happening to you, but God sees what is happening for you. Prayer lifts your perspective to His level. It allows you to see beyond the temporary chaos into the eternal plan. When your life is built on prayer, the world cannot shake what heaven sustains. Prayer becomes your anchor in storms, your compass in confusion, your rest in restlessness. It keeps your heart steady when your surroundings are unstable. It reminds you that even if the weapon is real, the victory is already written. That's why people of prayer carry a certain peace that confuses the world. They can be surrounded by battles but still walk with calm. They can face loss but still find gratitude. They can go through fire and come out refined, not destroyed. Prayer gives them that resilience. Sometimes prayer doesn't change the external situation. It changes your internal response. It teaches you patience where you wanted progress. It teaches you trust where you wanted control. It teaches you surrender where you wanted strength. And in that surrender, you find a deeper kind of power. You begin to realize that victory is not always visible. It's often silent, hidden in the quiet moments when you choose to trust instead of worry, to worship instead of weep. Prayer keeps you spiritually alert. It opens your discernment so that you recognize the weapons before they strike. You start sensing when something is not right, when someone's words carry hidden intentions, when situations are traps in disguise. That's the gift of a praying life. It equips you with foresight. The enemy may plan the attack, But prayer gives you early warning. You step around dangers unseen, protected not by luck, but by divine design. When your spirit is anchored in prayer, you stop needing revenge because you trust divine justice. You stop needing control because you trust divine timing. You stop fearing loss because you trust divine provision. Every battle that was sent to destroy you becomes a testimony in motion. Every weapon that was aimed at your peace becomes fuel for your praise. You begin to live with a sense of divine immunity, not arrogance, but assurance. You know that no power on earth or in hell can break what God has built around you. Prayer turns anxiety into authority. It gives you power over panic. It replaces sleepless nights with sacred stillness. When you pray, you move from reaction to revelation. You start hearing what God is saying in the middle of the storm. You start recognizing that even in the delay, there is direction. You realize that what looks like the enemy's attack is often God's training. That's why a praying person cannot be easily broken. Their peace is not built on circumstances, it's built on communion. The weapons may come as criticism, as rejection, as loneliness, as loss. They may come as sickness, betrayal, or disappointment. But prayer transforms those weapons into witnesses. Every time you survive, heaven takes note. Every time you forgive, you rise higher. Every time you choose peace over pain, you claim victory before the battle ends. Prayer becomes the bridge between pain and purpose, between struggle and strength, between despair and destiny. Even when you don't see results right away, prayer is still working. It moves silently, powerfully, invisibly. It rearranges what you cannot reach. It softens hearts, opens doors, heals wounds, and aligns paths. Sometimes the greatest miracles are the ones that happen inside you when bitterness turns to compassion, when fear turns to faith, when anger turns to understanding. That is the unseen power of prayer. It changes the battlefield by changing the warrior. To stay anchored in prayer is to stay connected to your power source. You can't control the weapon, but you can control your response. You can't stop people from speaking against you, but you can stop their words from living inside you. You can't stop life from testing you, but you can make sure your faith is ready for the test. Prayer gives you that preparation. It teaches you how to stand when you want to run, how to forgive when you want to fight, how to trust when you want to doubt. When prayer becomes your habit, victory becomes your lifestyle. Because prayer positions you under divine covering. It creates an atmosphere where evil cannot breathe, where fear cannot grow, where defeat cannot dwell. That's why the enemy tries to distract you from prayer, because he knows if you stay anchored, he cannot reach you. He can form weapons, but they will never prosper. He can speak lies, but truth will silence them. He can try to shake your peace, but the roots of prayer run too deep to be moved. Prayer doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real. God doesn't require polished words. He desires honest hearts. When you pour out your heart to Him, you are strengthened from within. That strength becomes your shield. It becomes your invisible defense against every unseen attack. Prayer becomes your daily armor, your morning protection, your midnight comfort. And with every whisper, every sigh, every cry, you are building walls of light around your life that no darkness can destroy. When your spirit stays anchored in prayer, no weapon can find its target. The arrows of fear fall short, the traps of deceit collapse, and the plans of the enemy dissolve. Because prayer places you in a dimension where human power cannot reach. It places you in the hands of the Almighty, where every danger loses its authority, where every plan against you loses its strength, where every word spoken against you loses its weight. Prayer makes you unshakable, untouchable, and unafraid because it keeps you surrounded by the presence that no weapon can ever pierce. Divine protection is not about avoiding storms, it's about walking through them untouched. The presence of God in your life does not guarantee that the road will always be smooth, but it guarantees that you will always be sustained. Life will test you, shake you, and sometimes even break you, but when God's hand is over your journey, nothing can destroy what He has destined. The storms may come to expose you, but they will also reveal what was hidden within you, your endurance, your courage, your faith. The storms of life are not always signs of God's absence. They are often proof of His trust in your ability to overcome. When divine protection surrounds you, you are able to walk through fire and not be burned, to face the flood and not be swept away, to stand in chaos and still carry peace. God's protection does not remove the challenge, it redefines it. The purpose of His covering is not to isolate you from difficulty, but to insulate you with strength while you are in it. Sometimes God allows the storm to rise because He knows it will reveal the power of His presence in your life. If He sheltered you from every test, you would never know the depth of His faithfulness. So He lets the winds blow, but He also holds you steady. He lets the waves rise, but He commands them not to drown you. Divine protection is not the absence of danger, it is the promise of deliverance. The people of faith throughout time did not live without storms. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, yet not a single tooth touched him. The 3 Hebrew boys walked into the furnace, but not even the smell of smoke clung to their clothes. These are not just ancient miracles, they are eternal reminders that when God covers you, you can stand in the middle of what destroys others and come out untouched. You are not kept safe because of your power, but because of His presence. The same fire that consumed others becomes your testimony, because divine protection changes the outcome. It transforms what should have ended you into what strengthens you. Sometimes the storm is necessary to separate what is temporary from what is eternal. It strips away the things that were never meant to stay, so that only what is real can remain. Divine protection ensures that even in loss, you are not lost. Even in pain, you are preserved. Even in confusion, you are guided. You may cry, you may bend, but you do not break. Because when God's hand is upon you, there is a limit to what life can take from you. You may walk through the valley, but you are never alone. You may face darkness, but you carry light within you. The storm does not define your destiny, it refines your spirit. The world measures protection by what it can see: walls, weapons, wealth, or power. But divine protection moves differently. It works in silence, behind the scenes, in ways unseen by human eyes. It redirects accidents, delays destruction, closes doors that lead to harm, and opens paths that lead to peace. You might never know how many times you were saved from danger because God intervened before it even reached you. His protection is often invisible but always intentional. You are covered in ways you cannot measure because heaven is constantly watching over you. Divine protection also means that even when you fall, grace catches you. You may stumble, but you will not stay down. You may be wounded, but you will not be destroyed. There is a resilience that grows inside those who walk under God's covering. You begin to realize that strength is not about avoiding the storm, but about learning how to dance in the rain. It is about standing firm in faith when everything else feels uncertain. The storm becomes your teacher, and God's protection becomes your reassurance that the lesson will not crush you. There are moments when divine protection does not feel like protection at all. When doors close, when people leave, when plans fall apart, it can feel like rejection. But later you understand that God was not punishing you, He was protecting you. He saw what you could not see. He heard conversations you were never meant to hear. He removed things that would have broken you beyond repair. The pain of divine protection often disguises itself as disappointment, but it is mercy in motion. It is the loving hand of a father who knows that sometimes the greatest protection is not giving you what you wanted, but keeping you from what would have harmed you. Divine protection allows you to walk through places that others feared to tread. It gives you courage where others felt paralyzed. It reminds you that the presence of the storm is not the absence of God. In fact, it is often in the middle of the storm that His presence becomes most visible. When you have nothing left to hold on to, that's when you realize He's been holding you all along. You begin to see that the storm you feared was actually the stage for His strength to be revealed. You are not kept untouched because the storm is weak. You are kept untouched because your protector is strong. Sometimes the storms that come into your life are the very ones that reveal your purpose. They test the foundation of your faith. They teach you how to pray differently, how to trust more deeply, how to wait more patiently. Divine protection does not stop you from entering the fire. It ensures you come out refined, shining, and transformed. It does not block the rain. It makes sure you don't drown in it. It does not silence the thunder. It gives you peace in its echo. There is beauty in walking through life's tempest, knowing that your destiny cannot be destroyed by what was designed to delay it. When you are walking under divine protection, you start to notice how things that were meant to harm you end up helping you. The betrayal that broke your heart becomes the push that brought you closer to God. The loss that emptied your hands made room for something greater. The delay that frustrated you protected you from a premature blessing. You realize that God's protection is not always about physical safety. It is often about spiritual preservation. He guards your peace, your purpose, your purity, your perspective. He doesn't just protect your body, He protects your becoming. The storm will always come, but divine protection teaches you to see it differently. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What is God showing me?" You start to notice the patterns of His faithfulness, how every storm that tried to take you out ended up building you up. How every setback carried seeds of strength, how every tear was watering the soil of your growth. Divine protection ensures that your pain is never wasted. It becomes the proof that you were covered even when you felt exposed. There will be moments when people around you wonder how you are still standing. They saw what you went through, but they cannot understand why you didn't fall apart. That confusion is the evidence of divine protection. You survived what should have destroyed you because grace built a shelter around you. You endured what others could not because faith became your fortress. The storm came for your peace, but prayer stood guard at the door. You are still standing not because the battle was small, but because your covering was mighty. Divine protection also has a way of separating you for a season. There are times when God will isolate you, not to punish you, but to protect what He is planting inside you. He removes distractions, closes certain doors, and allows you to walk alone for a while. It may feel like loneliness, but it is holy preparation. He is keeping you hidden until the time is right, shielding you from unnecessary battles and unseen dangers. When you are covered by divine protection, even your solitude serves a sacred purpose. The storms you walk through under God's covering become sacred journeys of transformation. They strip away ego and replace it with humility. They teach you dependence, not on the world, but on the Word. They build endurance, wisdom, and compassion. They remind you that peace is not the absence of problems, it is the presence of God in the middle of them. You start to realize that the true miracle is not escaping the storm, but evolving through it. When divine protection surrounds you, you begin to walk with quiet confidence. You stop fearing what's ahead because you know who walks beside you. The winds may howl, the waves may crash, but your spirit remains calm. You stop running from storms because you've learned that they reveal God's strength, not your weakness. You begin to move with peace even when the world moves in panic, because you know that if God allowed the storm, He also equipped you for it. If He permitted the test, He already prepared the triumph. Sometimes divine protection looks like stillness in chaos. It's the peace that makes no sense. It's the calm that confuses your enemies. It's the assurance that even if everything around you falls apart, the core of you remains intact. It's the unexplainable feeling that somehow everything will be all right, even when nothing seems right. That is the evidence of divine presence. It keeps you whole when life tries to break you in pieces. The more you experience divine protection, the less you fear what's to come. You stop praying for an easy life and start praying for a covered life. You understand that being untouched doesn't mean being untested. It means that even in the test, the teacher is present. The covering of God is not fragile. It is fortress strong. It shields you in ways you may never comprehend. Every storm eventually passes, but what remains is the strength it built within you. The winds that tried to tear you apart actually cleared your path. The rain that made you weep watered the seeds of your next season. The thunder that frightened you became the soundtrack of your faith rising. That's how divine protection works. It turns everything the enemy meant for harm into a testimony of survival. You will look back and see that the storms were never meant to destroy you. They were meant to demonstrate that God's hand was always on you. You were never walking through them alone. Every step you took, every tear you cried, every prayer you whispered was carried by grace. You were never abandoned in the chaos, you were being carried through it. Divine protection is not about keeping you from life's storms, but about proving that no storm can erase the purpose God placed inside you.